This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Protests erupt over unresolved historic issues as Japan's outgoing Prime Minister visits Seoul for a farewell meeting with South Korea's leader. Well, hundreds of thousands of people relocated on Hainan Island as Super Typhoon Yagi heads towards mainland China, with schools shut and flights cancelled for a second day. And South Korea cracks down on EV safety. New rules requiring battery brand transparency and pre-market safety checks to combat spontaneous fires. And the U.S. takes its tech war against China up another notch with new chip-related export curbs to further limit the Asian countries' access to cutting-edge technology. Also in East Asia tonight, the U.S. and China wrap up talks on how to confront the climate crisis. But energy experts say the outcome depends on who wins the White House come November. Plus, Hainanese chicken rice and satay, not the food you'd expect on a sightseeing train in Japan. Find out why Cebu Railway will be serving up Singapore cuisine created by a Michelin star chef. The Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is in Seoul to solidify a newfound partnership, likely his last summit with President Yoon Suk-yeol before leaving office. But some South Koreans protested his visit, pointing to unsettled disputes from Japan's colonial rule from 1910 to 1945. The protesters gathered outside the South Korean presidential office hours before Mr. Kishida's arrival, holding signs condemning the Yoon administration for siding with Japan on unresolved historical issues. Well, back in March last year, Mr. Yoon announced a plan to exempt Japanese companies from compensating Koreans, forced laborers from the colonial rule. Well, that move helped break a years-long impasse with Tokyo and led to a three-way security cooperation deal with Washington. But it also met fierce opposition at home.
말년 총리의 이른바 졸업 소풍을 국고를 들여서 하는 것이 부당하고 잘못된 일이라고 규탄하기 위해서 저희들은 이 기자회견을 하게 된 것이고요. 핵심적인 요구는 기시다 총리 일본으로 돌아가라. 그리고 윤석열 정부 규탄하고 당장 내려와라. 이런 요구입니다.
Mr. Kishida aims to advance relations before leadership changes in Japan and possibly the U.S. His tenure as Japan's prime minister will end this month after he decided not to seek re-election as leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. And for more on this, we have Micho Ishida. She's joining us live from Tokyo. Mitch, I believe the meeting just wrapped up a couple of hours ago. What is the latest you have for us?
Yes, well, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told reporters in Seoul that he and Mr. Yoon Suk-yeol signed a memorandum of cooperation. That's in the event of a need to evacuate their citizens from a third country, that they will work together with each other. And it's the first such agreement Japan has signed with another country. Now, Japan and South Korea have helped evacuate their citizens together in the past. For example, in 2023, Japanese evacuated on Korean-booked vehicles from Sudan. And the same year, Korean military aircraft transported Japanese from Israel. And Japanese self-defense force carried Korean citizens back to Japan. Now, today, on the back of global security threat with the war in Ukraine and Gaza and uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Straits, setting up a system to transport each other's citizens is even more crucial. And a joint evacuation makes sense being neighboring countries. Now, another key area of cooperation the two leaders discussed, it's easing border checks between the two countries. Tourism between the two countries is huge. Koreans and Japanese are the biggest travelers to both countries. And by easing border procedure, this could further increase traffic between the two countries. And Mr. Kishida said details will be worked out. Now, they also discussed regional issues, such as the situation in the Korean Peninsula, the cooperation with the U.S., which has been enhanced in a trilateral form. And Mr. Kishida also received support from Mr. Yoon on resolving the issue of Japanese abducted to North Korea.
So, Michu, we all know that Mr. Kishida, he's leaving office after Parliament votes for a new Prime Minister, which could be as early as the end of this month. So for Mr. Kishida now visiting Seoul for this bilateral summit, what sort of signals is he trying to send out?
Well, analysts here see improvement of ties with South Korea as a legacy of Prime Minister Kishida. And also, much credit should go to President Yoon, who took on a soft stance towards Japan. And that's different from his predecessors. They have met many times since and has launched so-called shuttle diplomacy last year, which Mr. Kishida said was one of the most important achievements with Mr. Yoon. And as you know, Mr. Kishida is not seeking re-election as president of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party this month, and this means he will no longer be prime minister. But Mr. Kishida said he believes that ties will remain positive and will remain solid.
Also, Mitch, could you just give us a bit of context here in terms of ties between Japan and South Korea before Mr. Kishida came to power?
Well, as you know, Japan-South Korea ties have had many difficult moments, and there are still difficult moments. It's mostly due to history-related issues. Japan occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945. And in 1965, ties were normalized with Japan paying wartime compensation. But from time to time, wartime issues such as compensation for so-called comfort women, wartime laborers were raised. And for example, Seoul's Supreme Court ordered Japanese companies to compensate former laborers, although Japan claimed that all wartime compensation was completed when ties were normalized. Then there was an incident in 2018 where South Korea's military aircraft locked on its laser beam towards Japan's self-defense force aircraft. Japan complained for its dangerous act. Seoul did not admit to it, and that incident deteriorated security ties. But recently, defense ministers of both countries agreed they will prevent such incidents from happening. Now, President Yoon handled these contentious issues, including the compensation of comfort women, which has satisfied Tokyo. And the trust built between the two leaders have been a huge asset to bilateral ties.
Well, Mitchell, we don't quite know who the next Prime Minister will be, who will be succeeding Mr. Kishida. But if you could just give us a glimpse into the future of what bilateral relations will look like.
Yes, well, Mr. Kishida is believed to have assured President Yoon that whoever becomes the next prime minister, relations between Japan and South Korea will remain solid. But the issue of concern is we hear President Yoon's approval rating at home is weak. And the largest opposition party there is seen to be accusing Mr. Yoon for his soft stance towards Japan. And there are concerns that the state of ties could regress post-Kishida, and for that matter, post-Yoon. Japan has seen too many South Korean leaders who were in the beginning trying to notch good terms with Japan, but shifted later to reviving wartime issues. So we cannot be too optimistic about relations going forward. But for the sake of citizens of both countries, it's important both sides keep making efforts to sustain the current warm ties, especially as the two countries observe 60 years of normalization of ties.
Well, thanks so very much for that report, Michio Ishida in Tokyo. More than 400,000 people have been evacuated in China's Hainan island as Super Typhoon Yagi makes landfall after lashing Hong Kong with heavy rain and powerful gales. Chinese authorities raised the response alert level as heavy rain pounded the coast. Flights were cancelled, businesses shut, and schools suspended. Forecasters say Yagi is expected to weaken as it tracks inland in the coming days. Now, neighboring Vietnam not taking any chances. The storm is forecast to hit its northern region close to the capital, Hanoi, this weekend. Authorities have evacuated thousands of people on coastal provinces to temporary shelters. Fishing vessels and tour boats are being secured. Airports in the coastal cities of Quang Ninh and Haiphong, as well as Hanoi's main airport, will be shut tomorrow. Reports suggest that Yagi is the world's second most powerful tropical cyclone and the most severe in the Pacific basin this year. The storm uprooted trees in Hong Kong, littering streets with debris. At least 5 people have been treated in hospitals for injuries. Well, authorities in the city have lowered the storm warning. Train operators are slowly restarting services, while some ferry services have resumed. Hong Kong's exchange, bank services and schools have been suspended for the day. Authorities warn that heavy showers and strong winds are set to persist over the city.
今次曬好多啦，啲風可能唔係打正呢邊咁我哋都做足防風措施㗎啦，紅灣村以前，因為講得即係報紙話好似天鴿咁犀利，其實爭好遠啊，咁都好係嘛，即係。
Earlier, we spoke to Mark Howden from the Australian National University, and he tells us how countries are taking measures to adapt to extreme weather.
Typhoons like this one, we have much better warning systems, so we can warn people ahead of time. They can take suitable action, either to get out of the way or to make their homes and buildings more secure, and that helps keep down the number of people who are injured or who die from these events. We also see increased ability to put in place infrastructure that can manage the strong winds associated with some typhoons. So things like improved building codes, improved drainage systems, improved urban planning. And these things can all add up to significantly reducing the risk associated with a typhoon of any particular strength. What we see across the globe, though, is not just typhoons, but we see other extreme events occurring, and you just had an item about high temperatures, which have been affecting almost everywhere across the globe this year, and we see extraordinary high temperatures emerging from the record, and that's going to drive up things like heat stress events, and associated with those can be increased intensity of rainfall, which increases flooding, not just in coastal areas, but in inland areas as well.
Stay with us here on CNA and across our other platforms for the latest on Typhoon Yagi. And you can also head to our website, cna.asia, and check out our mobile app. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, South Korea addresses public fears after cases of electric vehicle fires, pledging safety checks on batteries and boosting the accountability of car makers. Toyota Motor reportedly thinking of cutting its EV production target by 30% for 2026 as global sales growth slows. South Korea is moving to calm growing public concerns over the safety of electric vehicles. The government says it will perform safety checks on the batteries that power the cars. Well, a trial EV battery certification system will be launched in October before it comes into effect in February. And this allows inspections of batteries found in both locally and foreign-made EVs before they are produced. EV manufacturers will also need to furnish battery details, such as the brand and its chemical composition. That's on top of what's required now, such as the battery capacity, rated voltage, and its output. Well, Seoul is also seeking to boost accountability. It plans to exclude car makers without liability insurance from government subsidies and look into laws that will require EV charging businesses to be insured. In addition, the government wants to improve a software that detects and warns drivers of fire risks ahead of time. Parking lots in new buildings will also have to install sprinkler systems. Now, all these come on the heels of incidents that saw spontaneous battery-related fires destroy vehicles. In one high-profile case, a parked EV exploded into flames in an underground car park in Incheon. Well, that fire destroyed more than 100 cars. And it's now time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, it seems like it's not a very happy Friday for Chinese firms relying on the U.S. for advanced chip tech.
Yep, the Chinese aren't going to be happy. I'll tell you, the U.S. has announced more export controls on technologies related to advanced chipmaking and quantum computing, designed to further throttle China's advancements in these areas. The Commerce Department says the rules take effect immediately with a 60-day public comment period for feedback. Now, the new rules require special licenses for exporting quantum computing items, advanced chip-making tools, and key technologies used in high-performance semiconductors. Major companies like TSMC and Samsung are planning to or already have adopted these technologies. The restrictions also cover essential components in chip production, such as crucial materials used for advanced chip making. To promote international cooperation, the US is offering license exceptions to trusted companies with similar export controls, allowing them to bypass some of the new requirements. Now, these rules build on the 2022 measures restricting US firms from selling advanced tech to China without a license, with the goal of curbing its technological progress. Now, China is merging two of its biggest state-backed brokerages to create a powerhouse that will take on Wall Street. Guotai Tian'an Securities will merge with the smaller rival Haitong Securities through a share swap. The tie-up will create a behemoth with assets worth up to $230 billion. The transaction comes a year after President Xi Jinping told financial regulators to consolidate a few top-ranked investment banks to compete with Wall Street. Now, China's securities regulator aims to have up to 3 investment banks that can compete globally by 2035. By the end of last year, China has about 145 securities firms with combined assets of almost $1.7 trillion. But they've been grappling with a challenging climate as deal volumes slump. Now, capital markets also lackluster as China's weak growth dents investor sentiment. Haitong, for instance, saw its first half profit plunge 75% on year, valued at $13.6 billion in Hong Kong. Its shares have slipped some 11.2% so far in 2024. Under the pact, Guotai will issue shares to be listed on Shanghai and Haitong's domestic investors. Now, it will also do the same in Hong Kong with its H shares. No financial terms were disclosed. Both firms suspended trading in Shanghai and Hong Kong from today, and here's how they fared yesterday. A look at mainland equities. Investors remain cautious as sharp falls in technology and property counters offset gains in brokerages. The Shanghai Composite closing down the day 0.8% lower. Now, it's its lowest closing in more than 7 months. Shenzhen lost nearly 1.4%. The Hong Kong market suspended from trading due to Super Typhoon Yagi. Chinese brokerage jumped on expectations of further industry consolidation. An index tracking China-listed brokerages opened 2% higher before closing about 0.5% in the green. The CSSW Securities Index also ending up by about the same margin. A smaller brokerage, that's Sealand Securities, emerging the unlikely winner with shares jumping as much as 10%. Now, its Chinese name, Guohai, sounds like the merger of the names of Guotai, Tian'an, and Haitong. Remember, Chinese retailers known for their speculative trading based on homophones. Galaxy Securities also rising as much as 10% before closing the day 5% higher. Japan's biggest business lobby, Keidanren, says that domestic firms, especially those considering investing in the US, are closely watching Washington's review of Nippon Steel's proposed $15 billion acquisition of US steel. Now, the business body says it hopes the review procedure will be conducted with the utmost integrity and fairness in accordance with the law. The deal is facing growing bipartisan political opposition ahead of the US presidential election. Now, it has caught the attention of Japanese companies as Washington is Tokyo's closest ally and Japan is the biggest foreign investor into the US. It was reported yesterday the White House is close to announcing that President Joe Biden will block the Japanese company's bid on national security concerns. One of the frontrunners to become Japan's next premier has also raised concerns about the scrutiny of Nippon's bid is facing. Mr. Shigeru Ishiba said that any US move to block the merger on national security grounds would be very unsettling and could dent trust between the allies. The proposed takeover deal of 7-Eleven convenience store operator has fallen through. 7&I Holdings rejected a nearly $39 billion takeover proposal from Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard. The Japanese company said the offer was too low and faced with regulatory hurdles. Now, 7&I did, however, hint at potential interest for a sweetened deal. The 7-Eleven operator published a letter saying that they are open to consider any proposal that is in the best interest of shareholders. But they will resist any proposal that deprives shareholders of intrinsic value or fails to address regulatory concerns. The deal was poised to become the largest ever buyout of a Japanese firm by an overseas company. Both companies disclosed the Canadian firm's offer last month. It valued 7&I at about $14.86 US per share. Its shares have now surpassed that, closing at 2,134 yen apiece. That's about $15 today. The bid is the latest example of international investors becoming more interested in Japanese companies after they took steps to improve governance. Automaker Toyota Motor is reportedly set to reduce its electric vehicle production targets by 30% for 2026. A Nikkei report says that the world's best-selling automaker will aim to produce 1 million EVs globally instead of the previously projected 1.5 million units. Now, this would make Toyota the latest car maker to dial back their EV plans as sales growth slows. The Nikkei report says that Toyota has notified its parts suppliers of the revised plan. Now, under the new target, Toyota will manufacture slightly more than 400,000 EVs in 2025. And following the Nikkei report, Toyota said it hasn't changed its plans to produce 1.5 million EVs a year by 2026 and 3.5 million by 2030. However, it said that the numbers are not targets, rather they're benchmarks for shareholders. Still, even manufacturing 1 million EVs a year is an ambitious plan for Toyota, which has sold only about 104,000 EVs last year. It has also been putting more effort into developing hybrid vehicles. More stock market action for you. The rest of East Asian markets mostly in cautious mode on this last trading day of the week. Investors bracing for a crucial jobs report from the US and passing through Japan's latest household spending data. Now, it rose 0.1% on year in real terms in July, missing expectations. This could force the Bank of Japan to rethink raising rates. In Tokyo, the Nikkei 225 fell as much as 1.7%, a stronger yen weighing on sentiment. The yen currently is marginally high against the greenback, 142.92 to the dollar. It's trading at a 1-month high against the dollar. Kospi also losing ground for a second consecutive week. Local chipmakers tracking their Wall Street peers. And that'll do it for the business here in the studio. Oteli.
Thanks very much for that, Roland. Now, the U.S. is seeking clarifications from China after it abruptly halted its overseas adoption program. The move potentially impacts hundreds of American families who are still waiting to complete their adoption process. Well, U.S. families have adopted more than 82,000 children from China, but the process is a long one, culminating in the adoptive parents visiting China and bringing the child back home. Beijing suspended international adoptions during the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was later resumed for children who had received travel authorization prior to the suspension. It's unclear what triggered Beijing's latest decision, but China has been trying to reverse its falling birth rate. It has phased out its decades-old one-child policy, which was a key driver of babies, especially girls, being put up for adoption.
今后除外国人来华收养3代以内旁系同辈血亲的子女和继子女外，不再向国外送养儿童。这符合相关国际公约的精神。我们对有关国家政府、收养家庭希望收养中国儿童的愿望和爱心表示感谢。
Time now for a break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the world's top 2 greenhouse gas emitters wrap up talks on slowing global warming. We'll talk to an expert on what we can expect. Protests over unresolved historic issues shade a visit to South Korea by Japan's outgoing Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. More than 400,000 people are relocated on China's Hainan island as Super Typhoon Yagi makes landfall. Schools are shut and flights cancelled for a second day. South Korea takes action to boost electric vehicle safety. New rules requiring battery brand transparency and pre-market safety checks to combat spontaneous fires. A senior U.S. climate official says Washington and Beijing have made some progress on how to tackle global warming, but differences remain. U.S. climate envoy John Podesta and his counterpart Liu Zhenming have wrapped up 3 days of talks in Beijing. Now, also at the talks was Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Mr. Podesta says that they have made plans to hold a summit on reducing methane and other non-CO2 greenhouse gases. The talks come as China's emissions may be nearing their peak. Data shows the country is building almost twice as many wind and solar energy projects as every other country combined. And for more, let's bring in Xi Liang, Professor of Sustainable Construction and Project Management, Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction at University College London. Well, thanks very much, Professor Xi, for being on East Asia tonight. Now, we got a little bit of details from the talks, but nothing seems very concrete, as in we don't really have concrete details. But from what you have seen, Professor Xi, perhaps the fact that U.S. and China are even talking, I mean, that's already a win, isn't it?
Yes, I think that it's very important to have U.S. and China dialogue on climate change. Only these two major economies work together, then we can still maintain the chance for the Paris Agreement goal. And we have only a few years left for our emission before 1.5 degrees. So I think the talking of two countries is very important.
And also, Professor, I mean, we have reports saying that rather some experts, they believe that the outcome of the race for the White House, that could determine how ambitious China's climate efforts will be. And I'm curious to know what you think about that.
Yes, I think it definitely the presidentships will affect the U.S. Views on climate change internationally. And we can't speculate who is going to win the election, but it definitely will have some impact. But hopefully, no matter who is on the presidency, we can still figure out a way to work between U.S. and China on climate change. And I know many states in the U.S., like California, is actually closely working with Chinese province on climate change. So I can still see the link between regional government and the industry will carry on anyway.
Mm. Because, I just want to bring us back to 2017, right, when for then President Donald Trump, he announced that the U.S. would withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And I know that we don't know who's going to win this time around. It is a very close race. But if the U.S. were to do that under a potential Trump administration, do you think that China would fill that leadership vacuum and take on a more prominent role in climate governance?
Yeah, it's a good question. And China may have two options. One is may follow the U.S. and to slow down the progress. And secondly, and China may be able to fill a role and take more predominant role and working with the EU to drive the agenda on climate change. But even so, in absence of the U.S. effort, we still concerned whether a global agreement can be implemented effectively to accelerate the ambitions of climate change. But I can see a good momentum from China as Chinese industry in renewable and electricity, vehicle, battery, they are all advanced in the world. So it's a good reason for China to take a more advanced step.
All right. Now, we are seeing record heat waves, floods hitting Asia and other regions. And do these extreme weather events, right, to what extent does it actually put pressure on countries like U.S. and Chinese governments to take stronger action on climate change?
Yeah, I think they already feel the heat, and the U.S. and China already taking stress testing and a lot of measures against physical risk of climate change. And they also concern how this affects other developing countries. So this will have very strong impact physically and also financially. I can see U.S. and China will have good collaboration on both its own economy, but also to help other least developed countries to address the climate risk.
Right. Now, meantime, experts, it was in our report earlier as well, experts are saying that China's emissions might be peaking. So can you help us understand, is that a good thing, is that a bad thing, or is it a mixed bag?
Yes, China's there are debate about whether China's emissions are already peaking and whether China's emission will peak very soon. I think based on Chinese commitment, Chinese carbon emission will definitely peak by 2030 or earlier. So, and I think the current attention is after China's emission peaking, how fast China can bring down its absolute emission towards carbon neutrality as an industry giant in the world. And secondly, during the next 5 years, whether China will set up an absolute emission peaking target to control the greenhouse gas carbon emissions under this target is attention in the communities.
Well, it's been great speaking with you, and thanks so much for spending your Friday evening with us. Xi Liang, Professor of Sustainable Construction and Project Management at Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction at University College London. And when it comes to efforts to address climate change, no action is too small. It's increasingly common nowadays to see recyclables repurposed for the fashion runway, and they can also be given a new lease of life as fashion accessories. Well, one Taiwanese company does just that and takes that concept up a notch, making recycling the new name of the fashion game. Well, in their trash kitchen, workshop participants can actually turn throwaway items into a stylish new pair of sunglasses. One can experience the recycling process from start to finish, including the scrapping of their own plastic waste brought from home. It's melted down and molded into a pair of sunglasses in just 2 hours. The company says each pair of sunglasses made in the process can reduce up to 400 grams of carbon emissions. The wearable aside, MiniWiz also makes other products, such as tiles, bricks, and hangers out of recycled materials.
What we're trying to show in the trash kitchen is to let you see, feel, and touch within minutes how this process can actually work without secondary pollution, and you can actually turn something of value directly in front of you, rather than going through this infrastructure and never really happen.
A sightseeing train in Japan linking Tokyo and Saitama Prefecture will offer its guests a taste of Singaporean cuisine from January. Well, the tie-up between Cebu Railway and Singapore Tourism Board seeks to promote awareness of rural Japan to visitors, while encouraging Japanese to travel to Singapore. Well, CNA's Michio Ishida got a sneak peek.
Chefs working hard to whip up a feast of Singaporean culinary delight. Guests are served in a high-end restaurant setting while enjoying the changing scenery of Japan from their window.
This collaboration is aimed to benefit both Singapore Tourism Board and Cebu Railway. Japanese arrival to Singapore has not recovered to the pre-COVID-19 pandemic level, and STB is keen to attract more Japanese through this dining experience.
Outbound travel from Japan remains sluggish in general, partly due to the weak yen. STB says visitor arrivals from Japan to Singapore stand at nearly 300,000 this year as of July.
From Jan to July 2024, we saw an 80% increase over the same period last year. Just for the month of July in 2024, we've seen a recovery to 70% of pre-COVID, 70% of July 2019. I think because our objectives are similar, our customer segments that we're trying to target are similar.
Cebu Railway attracts 1.6 million commuters a day, with a nearly 180-kilometer railway network running through Tokyo and Saitama Prefecture. This dining experience is usually offered on weekends between central Tokyo and the mountainous area of Chichibu. Called 52 Seats of Happiness, it was launched in 2016 and so far has served up French, Italian, and Chinese courses and themed drinks and desserts, but it has not been promoted much overseas. Cebu Railway wants to change that through its collaboration with STB. Japan welcomed a record 21 million inbound tourists this year as of July, according to the Japan National Tourism Organization. However, most first-time visitors do not venture off the beaten track.
今日言っていただいた秩父なんかはまだまだ余裕がありますし、特にそのインバウンドの方の比率は非常に低いですので、 東京から77分で行けるという距離の近さ、1日に1個以上お祭りやってると、そういう地域ですので、行けば何かしらのお祭りがあると。
And the food on board will be an experience in itself. Michelin-starred chef Tatsuya Noda will create a menu of Singaporean fusion cuisine.
ずっとフレンチレストランで働いてきて、フレンチの修行をしてきたんですが、初めてシンガポール行ったんですけれども、あえて何も情報を入れずに行きました。初めての体験であったり感動みたいのをちょっと料理にして表現できたらいいなというふうに思ってます。
The Singapore-themed train will run for 3 months from January. Michio Ishida, CNA, Saitama, Japan.
And while we're still on the topic of traveling, this could be something you might want to add to your itinerary if you're planning a trip to Japan. The Nintendo Museum opens in less than a month in Kyoto, and it's a place that might remind people of all the nights they stayed wide awake, not necessarily because of homework.
Nintendo, for some, the best excuse to chuck real-life responsibilities. Its rich legacy in a museum in its birthplace, Kyoto, slated to open October 2nd. Way before Super Mario, Pokemon, and its public listing, Nintendo was born in 1889, originally producing playing cards and going through various reinventions because of the war and changing tastes. This new museum is built on the original factory site that once churned out these vintage toys. And without a doubt, some of these classic consoles will bring back memories of your past battles. So if you're done chasing bamboo, elaborate shrines, and the elusive geisha in Kyoto, Mario, Luigi, and Donkey Kong are waiting for you. Nintendo keeps wooing people by reinventing its iconic characters in new games and movies. Switch, now in its 8th year, is expected to push out a new version by next April. And in 2 years, there'll be another Super Mario film. Despite its recent dip in profits, the company still believes in retail space, with a new Nintendo store due to open in San Francisco's Union Square next year.
The time now for another break, but coming up on the bulletin, arrests in Indonesia over an alleged terror threat against Pope Francis, who has just finished a visit to the country and is now in Papua New Guinea. And Chinese football fans skewer the national team after their 7-0 thrashing by Japan. Our correspondent Lauren Ong joins us with the latest reactions after the break. Pope Francis has arrived in Papua New Guinea, continuing the longest papal visit he's undertaken overseas. Well, he arrived in Port Moresby following a 6-hour flight, and he was given a 21-gun salute at the airport. No more official events are lined up today. Well, the Pope is expected to talk about climate change and the need to do more to reduce global warming. A football pitch has been prepared for a mass for tens of thousands of people. Some pilgrims have reportedly traveled hundreds of kilometers on foot for weeks. Some are also hoping he will announce Peter Torot as the country's first saint. He was a catechist killed during the Japanese occupation in 1945. Well, the head of the Catholic Church departed Jakarta earlier today. The pontiff spent 4 days in Jakarta, meeting with President Joko Widodo and attending an interfaith gathering. Well, he is the third Vatican leader to pay a visit to Indonesia, following Pope Paul VI and Pope John Paul II in 1989. Indonesian police, meantime, say they have detained 7 people in a failed plot to attack the Pope. They were reportedly taken into custody earlier this week in Bogor and Bekasi, both cities just outside of Jakarta. The arrests came after the police received a tip-off from the public. And I will have continued coverage of the Pope's visit to the Asia-Pacific region across CNA platforms. And you can catch up with the latest on our website, cna.asia. Chinese football fans and media have turned against the national team after a 7-0 thrashing by rivals Japan in World Cup qualifiers. Well, the paper in Shanghai said that Chinese football had hit rock bottom called it a disastrous defeat. It pointed the finger at team manager Croatian Branko Ivankovic, saying that he is incompetent. Well, the defeat dominated Chinese social media platform Weibo, with the hashtag national team loses to Japan 0-7 viewed 480 million times as of this morning. Some netizens calling the football players national parasites or insects. One user pointed out that they hardly saw the Japanese goalkeeper during the 90-minute game. Another even called for the team to be disbanded, saying there is no point spending money on this useless project. Wow. For more reactions, we are joined by CNA's Lauren Ong in Beijing. Lauren, wow, parasites, insects. I mean, there's been pretty strong reaction to the loss, clearly.
Well, I'll tell you, there's tears, there's anger following last night's defeat, massive uproar on Chinese social media. And if we could pull up the stats real quick, you would see on social media polls saying that the respondents, about 40% of them feeling anger and about 10% feeling sadness over this 7-0 loss. And this response is very much in line with what we've seen with posts that have come up, videos of the Chinese national team returning to Dalian for the home team against Saudi Arabia next week, the next round of the World Cup qualifier, with reports saying that the mood at the airport was remarkably low. And indeed, this is China's second most biggest loss ever, just a goal short of the 8-0 loss to Brazil in 2012. And this comes just after China rode off its Olympic fever. We saw significant breakthroughs, but even then, criticisms against some of the upsets have been come with a crackdown from Chinese social media, with them removing tens of thousands of posts that are deemed negative or stirring conflict. But as you've mentioned earlier, that the state media has called this event a disaster, and industry observers note that this is rather uncommon for other sports, except for Chinese football, which has come into the spotlight in Chinese local media for their defeats. And so lots of reactions on that front, I'll tell you.
Losing to Brazil, I mean, that pill is probably easier to swallow than losing to Japan. But we know, like the rest of the world, there is a big fan base, right, for football in China. But help us understand, why is the sport unable to see success like the other sports, like the others that we've seen in the Olympics, for instance?
Well, according to industry observers, there's a host of issues, but there has been steps to rectify this. In 2016, there were plans laid out to help China become a football powerhouse by 2050. And indeed, President Xi Jinping has said that he is a fan of soccer and hopes to possibly see China qualify the Olympics or even have China host one. But even so, while there has been some progress in different fronts, like, for example, the number of facilities in the tens of thousands, as well as students picking up the sport, and the momentum has been disrupted by various things. Most significantly is the property crisis in 2021. Well, and that's because 10 out of 16 of the clubs in China's Super League are at least partly backed by property firms. And because of their financial woes in 2021, some of these clubs have actually folded, and most notably is the Guangzhou Football Club, which is backed by Evergrande. If you were to recall, it's notably known to be embroiled with debt, with several apartments unfinished. But even so, for a country which has seen success in so many other sports, like we've seen in the Olympics, why is it so hard for China to break through in terms of football? Well, let's have a listen.
足球是个复杂的系统，而且球场上11个人比赛，然后整支队伍20几位，然后它会产生的变化非常的复杂，它就需要复杂的、庞大的、强有力的、可持续性的这个系统去支撑竞争。而其他的运动项目呢，它比如说射击也好，那我只要抓住比如说几百名选手。
So a lot boils down to talent development at the grassroots level as we know it. But aside from that, what are some of the other issues that still stand?
Well, as you've heard from the soundbite earlier, this is not just looking at the talent pool. So for other sports, like for example, swimming or table tennis, it can be a smaller focus, a focus on athlete versus athlete. But for football, because it involves so many people, the team is about 11 people, as well as substitutes, the strategy, it's really ecosystem versus ecosystem, the football ecosystem in China versus the international football ecosystems elsewhere. So there are a host of issues when human talent the talent pool is one of the issues. Yes, China has a big population. Yes, many students are picking up the sport. But the challenge is to convert these students into professional athletes, and this pool of professional athletes has been small when it comes to selection for the national team. And also parents are hesitant in the first place, with much emphasis placing on academics, as well as there isn't a stellar track record for athletes to break through, to have a successful career in football. And there's also many national athletes being taken out of their smaller leagues to train in the national level, breaking some of the momentum they have in the smaller clubs in terms of training. But according to one analyst, he's been seeing some optimistic signs that things are possibly changing. Let's listen to what he has to say.
那我们最近观察到一个现象，就是中国的一些体育品牌一些运动的品牌呢，开始加大了对足球装备的投入。然后我们就去了解是为什么呢？说因为现在很明显能看到踢球的孩子增多了，接受专业训练的孩子在增加。
Well, other countries have seen success in terms of reforming their football ecosystem. Most notably is Japan. In 1981, it released its 100-year vision, and since then it's been making efforts to professionalize its football league, and we've seen it break through, climb up the ranks in terms of in the football ranks, and even in the 2022 World Cup, it's beaten heavyweights like Germany and Spain.
All right, looking forward to its comeback. Thanks very much. CNA's Lauren Ong, live from Beijing. All right, now for your Paralympics update. We begin with athletics at the Stade de France. It's the final lap for the men's T20 1,500 meters race, with Michael Brannigan of the USA leading the front pack. Not for long, though. Italy's Dieng overtakes the Rio 2016 champion with just a few hundred meters to go. But eventually, it's Ben Sandilands of Great Britain who seals the deal. He surged past his opponents, breaking both the world and Paralympic records with a solid finish, 3 minutes 45.4 seconds. An amazing feat for the 21-year-old's debut at the Games. Now, Portugal's Sandro Bessa in second, while Brannigan settles for bronze. And Polish runner Barbara Bejanuska-Zajac is now a four-time gold medalist in the women's 1,500 meters T20 race. The 43-year-old finished in 4 minutes 26.06 seconds, just a few seconds shy of the world and Paralympic records, which she holds. Ukraine wins silver and Brazil completes the podium. The T20 class broadly covers athletes with intellectual disabilities. Great Britain's William Bailey with an undisputed win in the men's table tennis semi-finals, beating his Dutch opponent Jean-Paul Montenu in straight sets for a shot at gold. Bailey will go against China's Yan Shuo in the MS7 category early Saturday morning. A Tokyo 2020 champion, Yan beat his Thai rival 3-2. Class 7 is for athletes with severe impairment of the legs or the playing arm. 3 more days of competition to go, and China with a comfortable lead at the top of the medal tally with 74 gold. Great Britain in second place with 38, and the US in third. And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can also find us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. Well, have a great Friday and a better weekend. Have a good one.